Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to tell you that there are three the most important updates for today. The first one is that as a result of drone attack, the Ukrainians lost 4 S-300 systems and 1 Gepard system of Germany production. The second important update is coming from Donetsk frontline. As a result of fierce clashes, the Ukrainians lost another 400 soldiers in this area. It's one of the heaviest losses since the beginning of a special military operation. And the third update, important update, is that we can see some kind of real intensifying of clashes and activity of the Russians on the Kupiansk frontline. Now let's start from the beginning and let's try to discuss all these updates step by step. And before starting and before talking about Kherson area and those S-300 systems, let's take a look at the Russian sources map. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. A lot of events took place during the previous 24 hours. The Russians are saying that they destroyed one M777 howitzer. The Russians are saying that they destroyed another INTPQ-36 radar in this area. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that as a result just of clashes and duels in this area, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems D-30 in addition to this M77 howitzer. Another important thing, that during the previous night there was a missile attack. To be more precise, the Russians launched at least 4 Kalibrs rockets in direction of Nikolaev, and they destroyed few buildings in this area. They destroyed this building that located, let's say, in the central part of Nikolaev, and also some sources are saying that there were some explosions in the vicinity of the airport. So what did happen? And after that, in another part of the report of Ministry of Defense, they're added that as a result of drone attack, the Ukrainians lost 4 S-300 systems and 1 Gepard system. So what did happen? To understand this situation, first of all, let's take a look at the Western deployment map. And as you know, there is like a very interesting, this map was updated recently, and there is a very interesting piece of information about the deployment of newly created brigade. And if you take a look at Odessa, you may find 38th Marine Brigade and 37th Marine Brigade. This brigade, according to this map, their main position is in the vicinity of Odessa, and if you read the report of Ministry of Defense carefully, you're gonna see that this report started with the fact that the Russians are saying that as a result of missile attack, they managed to prevent the redeployment of marine forces in this area. And this is the most important update. Now I'm going to tell you some kind of a real speculation, but I try to connect the facts that we have, and I build a small story, and I would like to share with you the story that I understand took place in this area during the previous 24 hours. So as we know, the Ukrainians are preparing themselves for the greatest counteroffensive operation. And one of the areas that the Ukrainians are going and are planning to return back is the area in the south of Kherson, this area. This small piece of land, and they need this area for one reason. If the Ukrainians are able to take control, let's go back to the Western source map. If the Ukrainians are able to take control over this part of Kherson district, then they will be able to unblock Nikolaev. And after that, they're going to have not 1 port, but 2 ports for the purposes the Ukrainians are doing, for grain deals, for weapon support, and so on. As we know, the Russians have blocked the current grain deal, but it doesn't mean that there's not going to be any grain deal. The Ukrainians, I believe, do have power, some drones to fight with the Russian naval forces, and this is going to be a part of a summer company, the clashes in the Black Sea, and I believe the Russians are going to win this. But anyway, the Ukrainians wants to unblock Nikolaev port and to start the greatest offensive operation in direction of Melitopol, in Zaporizhzhia. They need to do some actions in this area to stretch the Russian focus and to force them to keep some forces in this area. So for these purposes, the Ukrainians redeployed their forces from Odessa in direction of Nikolaev. exactly in the building that the Russians destroyed as a result of 4 missile rockets, so in this area. And the Ukrainians understand. They understand this perfectly, and they understand this very perfectly. Is that as soon as they start redeployment process, this process will be spotted by the Russians immediately. And they understand that Nikolaev is very close to the combat line, and that means that there are very high risk that the Russians will try to destroy the position of the Ukrainians in this area using missiles. And but the Ukrainians don't have time for stretching their forces inside of Nikolaev. Everything should be done very fast. They need to redeploy forces in Nikolaev, to wait maybe a day, and after that to stand this newly created brigade to the south. So imagine yourself, they were trying to redeploy not just like a very old 35th mechanized Marine Brigade, or let's say 72nd or something like this. The Ukrainians were trying to redeploy their newly created brigades with the help of Western countries. So they have redeployed their brigade in Nikolaev, and they understand that they need to do one thing. They need now to protect this brigade, and they understand that the only possible way how the Russians are able to get these forces in Nikolaev is missiles. So that's why the only possible solution for them is to use S-300 systems. So that's why the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy their S-300 systems along Dnipro River with one purpose: to protect the Ukrainian forces in Nikolaev. But S-300 systems is the type of systems that you can protect forces just from missiles, air forces, and so on. And these systems are very weak against drones. And for these purposes, you need to have another support air defense system that will protect the S-300 systems, if you know what I'm saying. And for these purposes, the Ukrainians took a decision to use German's Gepard. So this is not like missile systems, it's like a regular bullet system, and their purpose is to support and protect ground forces, infantry, air defense systems, and they can destroy every type of drones and everything that in the sky in the distance from 100 meters to 4 kilometers. So it's a perfect solution to shut down drones. And that was Gepard, the air defense systems that were deployed in Ukraine from Germany. I don't know what did happen then. I don't know who was maintaining and managing that Gepard system, but we saw a lot of video and photo confirmations where the Russians, using drones, mainly Lancet, were destroying the Ukrainians' S-300 systems. And as I understand, Gepard failed their job. They couldn't protect S-300 systems from Russian drones, and that led to the situation when the 4 S-300 systems were destroyed. And of course, that situation led to the situation when the Russians didn't have any problems to attack Nikolaev. And right after they destroyed those air defense forces, Ukrainian, they launched 4 calibers and destroyed the positions of 36th and 38th Marine Brigade inside of Nikolaev. The Russians haven't provided the real numbers of Ukrainian losses, but I believe they will give us the number tomorrow. Anyway, no matter the losses, they managed to prevent any Ukrainian attempts to start offensive operation in Kherson area, and this is another big disaster for the Ukrainians. And that's it about Kherson area. So one more time, the only thing that failed was the Gepard systems. They couldn't protect the Ukrainians' S-300 systems. Now let's move further, and now we're going to talk about Donetsk frontline, and we will focus on Bakhmut. The Russian sources map has been updated. Many maps were updated. The Western sources map was updated as well. If we take a look at Bakhmut, you're gonna see that now the Russians entered the military base. They're moving along Victory Street. They almost reached the Tchaikovsky Street and this Western fortification. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians still controls around 8% of this town. If we take a look at this map, and if we don't see the red color above some territory, it doesn't mean that the Russians are not there. Currently, the Ukrainians control something like this. Everything behind these arrows and red cloud is the gray zone, and the Russians are currently already there. Furthermore, a lot of sources and a lot of maps are saying that the Russians have already entered this western part of Bakhmut. The situation in this town is very complicated, and we see that Ukrainians are blocked in this area, and I don't see any solution for them how to evacuate from this western part. And I expect at least few solutions or few possible things that may happen in western part of Bakhmut. The first one is that, as we discussed yesterday, and it's my understanding of the situation, one of the topics that Zelensky were discussing with the comrades is to ask or to find a solution how the Ukrainians can evacuate forces from Bakhmut without being destroyed under heavy artillery fire. And as I understand, the Zelensky his idea was refused by Chinese comrades or something like this. And now the Ukrainians have few options. The first one is to surrender. The second one is to fight till the last Ukrainian. And the third one is to make attempt to break through the cauldron and to evacuate or run away from Bakhmut in direction of Chastov Yar. If you remember almost the same situation we could see in Mariupol when the Russians were storming the Zavod Ilitcha, the Ilitcha plant. This one, and if you remember, the Ukrainians were trying to make some trick. They marked their own vehicles with the Russian signs, and they were trying to evacuate from Mariupol as if they were some kind of Russian forces. But they were discovered, the trick was discovered, and they were attacked by the Russian forces, and within a day, something around 1,000 soldiers surrendered. So the same situation possibly we are going to see in Bakhmut. The Ukrainians will make some trick for evacuation process and so on, but anyway, I don't believe. If the Ukrainians will try to make breakthrough operation from the western part of Bakhmut to Ivanovska and then to Chastov Yar, they will be destroyed under fire, under very heavy fire. If the Ukrainians will make a decision to stand there and fight till the last Ukrainians, this decision can be taken just by military authorities. Believe me, a regular soldier inside the western Bakhmut don't want to die. Of course, in this case, the forces in Bakhmut can take their own decision to run away from this town, and they will destroy it under fire, under artillery fire. And the third option for the Ukrainians is to surrender. But this is not an option for the forces in the western part of Bakhmut. And the thing is that during the clashes in Bakhmut, we need to understand this is a war. And then believe me, there were a lot of terrible things in this town. Made by the Ukrainians, maybe made by the Russians. There were a lot of tortures, killings, and so on. And believe me, I don't think that Ukrainians who are currently located in the western part of Bakhmut want to be captured by the Russians, and after that, they don't want to be discovered, and they don't want anybody to know what kind of terrible things were happening in this part of Bakhmut and what kind of bad things these guys were doing with the Russian soldiers. So to surrender for them is not an option. I see just two, and in just one of these options have the heaviest chances is that at some certain point of time the forces in western Bakhmut will take a decision to make a breakthrough. As soon as they understand that there are going to be no support from the Ukrainian authorities, from the Ukrainian forces, they will track a massive chaos decision to evacuate. They will be covered by the fire, of course. Let's say 30, maybe 40% will be able to run away and to survive. But more than 60% will be destroyed under heavy artillery fire from the Russian side. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians managed, according to the Western source map, get the channel, this area, and currently there is another risk of being attacked from in direction of Grigorievka and Bogdanovka. Currently these two areas is split in two parts or many parts, and there might be not just one but even a several number of cauldrons in this area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours in this area the Russians attacked 59th Brigade. This brigade is located in Slaviansk. There are positions in this area, this Slaviansk, this Karpovka. The Russians are saying that when talking about Donetsk front line, they attacked 71st Jaeger Brigade, and this brigade was attacked in Grigorievka and Serebryanka. In these two, Belogorovka, Grigorievka, Serebryanka. As you can see, Currently, this is the most focused area in the entire special military operation, and we're receiving more and more many updates from this area about many losses from the Ukrainian side, about a significant number of artillery concentration, and so on. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they, one more time, for the third or the fourth time in a row, they attacked 54th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Verkhnekamenska. This is maybe the first time in a row when they're doing this. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they attack 28th Mechanized Brigade in a very interesting town by the name of Kleban-Byk. This brigade and this position of this brigade is located on the south of Konstantinovka. This is very far from the combat line, and this is very interesting why the Russians took a decision to bomb this area, and what is 28th Brigade about in this area. So I don't remember any updates about this brigade maybe since the autumn of the previous year. And of course, during the previous 24 hours, the 110th Brigade was the most hunted brigade in the vicinity of Donetsk. The Russians are saying that they destroyed the positions of this brigade, and furthermore, they destroyed the headquarters of this brigade as well. So as you can see, a very rich day for the Russians when talking about the dual Ukrainian positions and headquarters and so on. And I expect that soon something is going to be broken in Donetsk area, in Avdiivka, Nivolska, Marinka as well. Furthermore, if we take a look one more time at Donetsk area, we see the progress of the Russians to the south from Pobeda in direction of Novomikhailivka. We can see the first signs of small salient in this area as well. The Russian sources are saying that they're continue developing their offensive operation from Mykolaiv along the foreign lines to the north in direction of Vadiana in this area, and the Russians are saying that, as you can see, the Western source map has been updated. We see that the Ukrainians during the previous months made some kind of counter-offensive operation trying to return control over this residential area between Pavlovka and Nikolskoye, but they were defeated, and the Russians, managed to return control over this area. So this about Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson area, and now we are going to talk about Kupiansk and Lyman frontline. We have partly touched the Lyman area when talking about Belogorovka. One more time, the Russians continue attacking 51st, 71st. So this area is under very heavy fire. But the level of losses of the Ukrainians in this area is just 70 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. The level of losses is less in comparison with the February and March when the Russians were launching some kind of support operation while attacking the Ukrainians in Berkhovka, Yagodnaya, Krasnogora, Blagodatnaya, and Paraskovivka. As soon as the Russians captured these settlements, the Russians reduced the pressure in this area. But currently we see the increase of pressure on the Kupiansk front line. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 110 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. Maybe this is the result of, if you remember, during the previous weeks, we talked a lot about the fact that the Russians managed to break rotation process in this area from the Ukrainian side, and maybe now the high level of losses is the consequences of that actions that the Russians took a decision to make during the previous weeks. Very interesting situation, but from the other side we see that there are no changes on the ground. Some Ukrainian sources were saying that the Ukrainians moved a lot of reserves to the Kupiansk, to Oskol River. Maybe this is the reason. As you can see, there are not many towns in this area, not many places where the Ukrainians can keep their forces. Maybe some kind of over concentration of the forces allowed the Russians to use their bombs, missiles more accurate, and that lead to the situation of the increasing of losses from the Ukrainian side. Very difficult to understand without any progress on the ground. If there was some progress on the ground, we could connect the things between each other. But we see that the front line are completely stable, but the losses are growing. Very interesting, and I believe soon we are going to understand and to get more updates from this area. Furthermore, the Russians report about destroying of 2 raiders in the vicinity of Drushkovka. It was like Ukrainian-made raiders, but anyway. Also, the Ukrainian lost another aircraft Su-24, and also the Russians reported that Ukrainians lost up to 21 drones during the previous 24 hours. A lot of updates are coming from Zaporizhzhia and Energodar. The Ukrainians continue accumulating and collecting forces on this bank of the river. From the other side, the Russians turned Energodar and make it as like another Ugledar, but from now it's like from the Russian side. It's a very powerful fortification with the fighting positions even inside the nuclear power plant. The Russians understand the risks and the value of this town, and they're not going to give up this town and not going to step back from this area. I believe that they have already moved a lot of supply and support, so the Russians think that there are very high chances that during the greatest Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, one of the Ukrainian direction is going to be Energodar and Zaporizhzhia power plant. And that's it for this video. Thank you for Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.